The storm arrived before evening had the chance to settle, sweeping across the valley like a wounded thing searching for a place to lie down. Snow drifted over the open plains in pale, swirling veils, muting the land until all that remained was the hush of winter breath lying over the world. Inside her small cabin on the outskirts of Willow Ridge, Rosemary Holloway lit her lantern and watched the frost gather along the windowpane like thin white scars. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her, listening to the wind press at the walls in long, aching sighs that felt too familiar. Winter had a way of echoing her own loneliness back at her. Nights like this made every memory sharper, every silence heavier, every tiny ache in her ribs a little more noticeable. She tried working her needle, but her hands moved slower than usual, burdened by something she could not name. The room felt too large around her. The world outside felt too wide. And the snow kept falling, falling, as if it meant to bury more than just the land. The first knock was so soft she thought it belonged to the storm. It barely touched the wood, a hesitant tap swallowed almost immediately by the howling wind. She froze, needle paused mid-stitch, breath caught in her throat. No one came this far out during weather like this. No one should have been traveling at all. When the knock came again, still gentle, still strained, she rose slowly, her heartbeat thudding against her ribs in quiet warning. She stepped toward the door, each footfall muffled by the thick rug beneath her. For a moment she simply stood there with her hand on the latch, listening. The only sound was the wind. The only certainty was the cold seeping through the cracks. She drew a breath, braced herself and pulled the door open. A giant shadow filled the doorway, snow crusted along his braids, frost clinging to the broad expanse of his bare chest. The man towered over her, a massive Apache warrior whose dark eyes reflected lantern light like a river holding starlight at its bottom. He said nothing at first, though his breath steamed in heavy clouds, and the cold rolled off him in waves. Beside him, half hidden by his leg, a small girl clutched a wrapped bundle to her chest. Her cheeks were red from windburn, her lashes salted with frozen flakes. She stared at Rosemary with wide, trembling eyes that carried exhaustion deeper than a child should know. Rosemary's first instinct was fear, sharp and instinctive, but it was quickly smothered by something warmer, something older than caution. "Just one night," the man said, voice low but frayed at the edges. "She is freezing." The girl shivered visibly, her small knuckles white where they clutched the bundle. Snow gusted between them like a warning, but Rosemary stepped aside anyway. The decision rose from her faster than she had time to consider it. Compassion had always undone her, even when it cost her. "Come in," she whispered, feeling the weight of the storm behind them. "Quickly, before the cold swallows you both." They entered with the silence of people accustomed to survival. The man carried the storm inside with him, its wildness, its endurance, its solemn strength. The girl carried something softer, a trembling vulnerability that tugged at Rosemary's heart. She hurried to the hearth, stirring the fire into a brighter flame. The warmth spread slowly across the room, brushing their chilled skin with hesitant fingers. The man knelt by the fire, placing the girl close enough to feel its heat, but not so close as to overwhelm her. His movements were careful, almost reverent. He didn't ask for anything else. Didn't speak further. Didn't explain. Rosemary watched him from the corner of her vision. Scars marked his chest in places, thin and white against bronze skin, the kind of scars that told stories meant to stay unspoken. He should not have survived long in such cold without a shirt, yet he knelt there steady and unshaken, like the winter had learned to bend around him. She wanted to ask why he traveled that way, why the girl's eyes looked so hollow, why the storm had delivered them to her door instead of anywhere else. But the questions felt too loud for the fragile quiet between them. She knelt beside the girl, offering her a warm cup. "What's your name?" "Nita," the girl whispered, voice soft as falling snow. "And yours?" Rosemary asked the man, though something in her already sensed his answer would carry weight. "Dakota," he said simply. She nodded, absorbing the names as if they were small flames she had been trusted to hold. For a moment they simply existed there, three strangers bound by winter and circumstance, until the fire crackled louder, filling the silence with its gentle hum. Rosemary felt her heartbeat slow, though not entirely. This man filled the room differently than any visitor she'd ever allowed inside. His presence did not demand space, it shaped it. Hours drifted by with the storm outside thickening against the window panes. Nita fell asleep near the hearth, her breathing deep, and even now, Dakota remained still, watching the flames reflect across her sleeping face. Rosemary sat in her chair but found herself unable to return to her stitching. Every time she threaded the needle, her gaze slipped back to them, this father and daughter carried by the storm to her threshold. "You can rest," she murmured at last, touching the edge of the blanket. "Both of you are safe here for tonight." Dakota lifted his eyes to hers. Something unreadable flickered there. Not distrust, not fear, but something far heavier. "Night is enough," he replied, though the way he said it carried a quiet ache. Rosemary sensed he had been told to move along more times than anyone should endure. Something in her chest tightened. She understood that feeling. She had lived her life on the edges of a town that never fully welcomed her. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered, surprised at her own tone. Dakota bowed his head, a gesture so sincere it startled her. "Kindness must always be honored," he said. Outside, the storm roared against the walls with renewed fury. Inside, the cabin felt warmer, though she couldn't explain why. She watched him settle beside his daughter, watched the firelight cast a soft glow over their faces, watched something inside herself shift in a way she had not expected. She had offered shelter before, but this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something the snow itself had chosen. As the night deepened, Rosemary dozed lightly in her chair, the fire humming beside her. She didn't see Dakota watch her with the same quiet attentiveness he gave the storm. She didn't hear him whisper words meant only for the sleeping world. But the wind heard. The snow carried it. And the walls, tender from years of silence, seemed to lean closer to catch the vow he breathed into the dark. "By dawn," he murmured, voice low as embers collapsing, "this is our home." And though Rosemary slept, something in her stirred, as if her spirit recognized a truth her mind had not yet awakened to. Morning arrived pale and hesitant, its light filtered through a sky still bruised with the remnants of the night storm. Snow blanketed the world in a hush so complete that Rosemary Holloway felt she was waking inside a dream she hadn't meant to enter. The fire had burned low, its last embers pulsing faintly like a heartbeat beneath ash. Dakota was already awake, crouched by the hearth as if guarding the warmth for Nita, who slept curled beneath Rosemary's quilt. He looked carved from the dawn itself, still, solemn, and too large for the fragile quiet of her home. Rosemary rose slowly, unsure where hospitality ended and uncertainty began. Dakota greeted her with a small nod, but it held gratitude in a way that felt heavier than words. She wished that weight didn't matter to her as much as it already did. She stepped outside to fetch water, and the cold met her with a sharpness that cleared her thoughts. The air carried a stillness that belonged only to fresh snowfall. Every footprint she made felt like a declaration on untouched parchment. But when she returned to the cabin, she found Dakota outside splitting wood with a steady rhythm, bare-chested still, as if winter respected him enough not to bite. Rosemary startled at the sight, nearly spilling the water. The early sun caught the sculpted lines of his shoulders, and the scars mapped across his skin. He swung the axe with an effortless grace, each strike reverberating through the quiet morning. She should have told him to stop. She should have said he owed her nothing. Instead she only watched, breath caught in the quiet marvel of the moment. When he noticed her, he stepped back politely, wiping snow from his brow. "Your porch was weak," he said, nodding toward the rail he had repaired. "A strong wind would break it." She didn't know whether to thank him or scold him. Her heartbeat decided before she did. By midday, she saddled her mare for the long ride into town. The sudden responsibility of 2 extra mouths pressed on her mind like fresh snowfall, soft but undeniable. Dakota offered to accompany her, but she refused gently, not ready for the town's eyes to settle on him. Nita tugged Rosemary's sleeve before she left, placing a small woven string bracelet in her palm, its pattern simple but careful. "Papa says kindness must be honored," she whispered. Rosemary touched her cheek before riding away, the bracelet tightening around her heart more than her wrist. Willow Ridge greeted her with stiff glances and lips pinched in practiced judgment. Snow still fell lightly, dusting the storefront roofs, but the air carried a different chill, one that had nothing to do with winter. Tessa Loudermilk stood outside the mercantile, her eyes narrowing as she took in Rosemary's tired appearance and frost-reddened cheeks. "You look worn out," Tessa said, loud enough for others to hear. "Storm kept you busy?" The implication curled under her words like smoke. Rosemary ignored it, pretending she didn't feel the weight of every gaze following her. Inside the mercantile, whispers rose like wind through brittle grass. Someone muttered about Apache tracks near her land. Someone else speculated about her loneliness clouding her judgment. A man near the stove spat into the fire and muttered, "Strays'll bring trouble. Always do." Sheriff Raleigh Hawthorne entered then, boots crunching on melting snow. He scanned the room before settling his disapproving gaze on Rosemary. "Heard you took in an Apache," he said, tone flat enough to hide the threat beneath it. She didn't bother denying it. A father and his child. They would have frozen. He nodded once, slow and cold. "Storm's over. Send them on their way. Folks don't take kindly to surprises." Rosemary swallowed hard, feeling the heat of humiliation creep up her neck. It was one night. The sheriff's silence told her that the town didn't believe in mercy lasting even that long. By the time she returned home, her heart felt scraped raw by judgment she couldn't outrun. But when she entered the cabin, she found Nita sweeping the floor with a too-big broom, humming softly, and Dakota repairing the loose hinge on her door. The scene disarmed her. This wasn't intrusion, it was caretaking. Uninvited perhaps, but earnest. She set down her parcels and spoke quietly, though her voice trembled more than she intended. "People are talking. Sheriff says you can't stay." Dakota paused, fingers resting lightly on the hinge. His shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. "We have been turned away many times," he said, tone steady but laced with grief. "But she slept without fear here. That is rare." Rosemary felt the words settle into her chest like warm stones. She had not meant to give them anything more than shelter, but she couldn't deny the way her home felt changed with their presence, not heavier but fuller. "You can't stay long," she repeated, though the words tasted wrong. Dakota met her gaze then, and the quiet sorrow in his eyes startled her. Not self-pity, just a weary acceptance of yet another place that would not keep them. "We will go," he said. "But know this, we never wish to bring you burden." Rosemary's throat tightened. "You didn't," she whispered. "Not in the way they think." Dakota bowed his head slightly, a gesture that felt more intimate than any touch. "Your kindness is more than we expected." Late afternoon light filtered through the frosted windows, painting soft gold onto the wooden floorboards. Rosemary watched Nita arrange small stones and patterns near the hearth, her soft humming filling the silence. Dakota stepped outside, mending something unseen beyond the porch. She followed him with her eyes, wondering why the world chose to cast out a man whose actions spoke only gentleness. As the sun sank behind the snow-dusted hills, washing the land in muted rose, Rosemary felt a shifting inside her, a subtle but undeniable pull toward something she didn't yet understand. When evening settled, Dakota returned inside quietly. Nita curled against Rosemary's lap, already half asleep. Rosemary brushed the child's hair back gently, feeling tenderness bloom in unfamiliar places. Dakota watched from across the room, expression unreadable, though something warm flickered there in the firelight. The cabin felt impossibly small now, not from crowding, but from the closeness of unspoken truths. Outside, the sky deepened into indigo, and a faint wind brushed against the shutters, carrying with it the first whispers of another storm. Rosemary glanced toward the door, feeling the subtle shift in the air, nature tightening the world, narrowing paths, forcing choices. And before she could question it, she sensed Dakota had heard the same wind. His gaze drifted to the window, jaw set with quiet resolve. Snowflakes began to fall again, and with them came the unmistakable feeling that these two souls were not meant to leave her doorstep as easily as the sheriff believed. Snow lingered for 2 more days, clinging stubbornly to the world, as if determined to stall every certainty Rosemary Holloway thought she possessed. The storm had quieted, but the stillness it left behind carried a heavy, listening quality, as though the valley itself waited to see what she would do next. Inside the cabin, warmth flickered gently from the hearth, softening the edges of fear that had followed her home from Willow Ridge. Dakota moved with silent purpose, repairing small things she never noticed were broken. Nita brought brightness to corners that had long forgotten laughter. Yet despite their gentleness, tension threaded the air like an invisible wire stretched too tight. Every kindness they offered made the danger feel closer, not farther away. Rosemary rose early that morning, gripped by a need to breathe air untainted by worry. She saddled her mare and rode toward the river, the snow muffling her horse's footfalls. The cold bit at her cheeks, but the familiar ache steadied her thoughts. When she reached the water's edge, she let out a trembling breath she hadn't known she was holding. She didn't want the town to define her choices. She also didn't want her cabin to become the stage for another person's grief. Yet when she thought of sending Dakota and Nita away, something fragile inside her protested. By the time she returned, a wind colder than the weather had settled over Willow Ridge. Word had spread swiftly, as it always did in small towns with too much time and not enough mercy. Stories warped in the retelling. Some said Dakota claimed her land, others that she'd given herself to him, and still others that she sheltered a fugitive. Tessa Loudermilk had become the eager conductor of this chorus of cruelty, her sharp tongue slicing through reputations with the efficiency of a butcher's blade. Rosemary heard fragments of this gossip floating behind her when she went to buy supplies, whispers carrying her name through the saloon doors and across the boarding-house steps. She tried to hold her chin high, but shame moved through her with the stealth of winter wind, bitter and relentless. Inside the mercantile, voices hushed when she entered. The clerk handed her items with stiff fingers, avoiding her eyes as though looking at her might tether him to her scandal. A group of men near the stove muttered as she walked past. One of them said, "An Apache claims a home the moment he steps inside it." Another added, "Trouble follows their kind like tracks in fresh snow." Rosemary's hands tightened around her basket until her knuckles paled, but she didn't turn back. She had learned long ago that facing cruelty only fed it. But Sheriff Hawthorne confronted her before she could leave town. He stood tall near the water trough, his badge glinting like ice in the winter sun. "You defied my instruction," he said. "Man should have been gone by dawn." Rosemary kept her voice steady. The storm returned. They had nowhere to go. The sheriff studied her, weighing not her words but her loyalty. "Be careful, Miss Holloway," he said finally. "You let him stay, you take on the trouble that comes with him." She walked away without answering, though her pulse pounded like hoofbeats trapped beneath her skin. When she returned home, she found Dakota sitting on the porch steps, sharpening a small blade with slow, rhythmic motions. Nita braided threads of colored yarn beside him, humming a quiet tune. Dakota lifted his gaze when Rosemary approached, his dark eyes searching her face with a perceptiveness that always left her exposed. "The town turned colder," he said softly. She nodded. "They believe you intend harm." Dakota considered this with the gravity of a man accustomed to injustice. "We bring no trouble." "I know," she whispered, though she wasn't sure knowledge alone could shield them. Inside, tension simmered beneath the surface of their routines. Rosemary found herself noticing the smallest details. How Dakota's presence steadied Nita, how he never made a sound larger than he meant to, how he stood between her and the cold draft without comment. She felt herself changing in ways she could not articulate. The loneliness she once carried like a second skin now shifted and reshaped itself, replaced by a growing ache she didn't know how to name. She felt herself drawn toward them, not out of charity but something deeper, something rooted in the way they softened the spaces around them. Yet rumors continued to coil through Willow Ridge like smoke from a slow-burning fire. One evening, Mrs. Hargreaves stopped her near the church path, her expression pinched with worry rather than malice. "They're saying a group of men mean to ride out your way," she whispered. "To see if the Apache intends to claim your land by force." Rosemary felt her stomach drop. "He's done nothing." "Truth doesn't matter when fear is louder," the woman replied gently. "Be careful, dear." The warning echoed in Rosemary's mind as she rode home beneath a sky painted with fading lavender light. She found Dakota standing in the yard, testing the repaired latch on the shed door. His posture stiffened subtly at the sight of her distress. "Something changed," he said. She dismounted slowly, her breath unsteady. "They think you're here to take what's mine." Dakota didn't flinch. "We have taken nothing." "But they fear you will," she murmured. "They're planning to come." Snow crunched beneath his boots as he stepped nearer, not invading her space, but offering steadiness like a tree bracing against storm winds. "Fear speaks louder than truth," he said. "But truth still lives, even when it is quiet." Rosemary felt heat gather behind her eyes, the day's humiliation pressing hard against her spirit. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. Dakota's expression softened. "You are not the one who broke it." She exhaled shakily, realizing she had never heard someone defend her so simply, so without condition. That night, as wind brushed against the shutters, Rosemary sat by the fire with Nita curled against her side. Dakota sat across from them, weaving a small piece of leather with practiced hands. The glow of the flames cast warm shadows over his face, emphasizing the quiet strength there. Rosemary felt the room thicken with unspoken truths. She sensed something building, delicate yet undeniable. It frightened her, but it also steadied her in ways she couldn't admit. When the flames dipped low, Dakota's voice came softly, almost hesitant. "Do you wish us gone?" Her breath faltered. "I wish the world were kinder," she whispered. "But I don't wish you gone." Something warm flickered in his eyes, a light she hadn't seen before. It made her chest tighten, made her heart feel suddenly aware of its own wishes. Before she could speak again, a distant sound drifted through the cold night. Hooves, muffled by snow but unmistakable. Dakota rose instantly, his movements quiet but alert. Rosemary felt her blood turn to ice. Nita lifted her head, fear darkening her small features. Rosemary moved toward the window, parting the curtain by an inch. Lanterns glowed in the distance. Voices carried through the still air. And the shape of several riders emerged from the dark, moving steadily toward her home. The riders approached through the falling snow like shadows pulled loose from the darkness itself, their lanterns swaying with each hoofbeat, casting glowing halos that moved over the drifts in slow, ominous circles. Rosemary Holloway stood frozen by the window, fingers curled tight against the curtain, breath small and quick in her chest. Behind her, Nita clung to Dakota's leg, sensing something in the air that frightened her more than the cold ever had. Dakota remained still, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. He looked like a man who had stood before storms far greater than this one, yet there was a sadness in his eyes, as if he already knew what path the night meant to force upon them. Rosemary stepped away from the window, heart pounding with a rhythm she could not quiet. "They're coming here," she whispered, though Dakota already understood. The sound of hooves grew louder, crunching through snow with a steady, deliberate cadence. Lantern light flickered across the wall, each pulse inching closer, brighter, harsher. She felt as though the night pressed inward, cold and expectant. Dakota knelt to Nita, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Stay inside," he murmured, voice soft but weighted. "Do not fear. Nothing will take you from me." Nita nodded, though her lips trembled. Rosemary's heart twisted. She had not meant to become part of this story, had not meant to shelter a man the town feared, had not meant to place herself in the line of their judgment. Yet here she was, breath shaking, soul leaning toward something she could no longer deny. The riders stopped outside her fence. Boots hit the ground, snow scattering beneath heavy steps. Voices murmured, low, hot with accusation. One man said, "He's in there." Another replied, "We know what to do." Rosemary felt cold race down her spine. She turned to Dakota. "You can't go out there alone," she said, but he simply rose to his full, towering height, the fire casting gold across his scars. "I have faced worse than frightened men," he murmured. "But I will not bring harm to your home. I stand in peace." The words pierced her with their quiet dignity. Lantern light spilled through the window as fists pounded against the door. "Open up, Rosemary." A voice barked. "We aim to see the Apache for ourselves." Rosemary's breath turned thin. Fear clawed at her ribs. She saw Nita press herself into a corner, small hands trembling. Something inside Rosemary broke and reformed in the same moment, fragile and fierce, delicate and unyielding. She had known isolation all her life, but never had she known the exact moment where courage demanded to be born. Before Dakota could move, she stepped past him and unlatched the door. Cold air surged inside, swirling around her skirts. The men outside straightened, surprised. Lanterns illuminated their faces. Tight jaws, narrowed eyes, breaths steaming in angry bursts. Tessa Loudermilk stood among them, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak. Her lips curved into something between triumph and disdain. Sheriff Hawthorne remained seated on horseback behind them, watching, his silence more dangerous than their shouts. Rosemary stepped onto the porch, squaring her shoulders despite the trembling in her legs. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, melting slowly as she faced them. "You don't have any right to be on my land," she said. Her voice wavered but held. "There is no trouble here." The men exchanged glances, uncertain how far they were willing to go in the presence of a woman who refused to shrink. Tessa lifted her chin. "No trouble," she scoffed. "You've taken in a man who has no claim to this place. You think the town will stand by while he settles himself into your home?" Rosemary swallowed hard. "He isn't settling," she said. "He's protecting his child. They needed warmth. I offered it." A man stepped forward, pointing. "He'll claim this land by staying. It's how their kind works." Dakota appeared in the doorway then, tall as the wind-torn pines behind him. His presence drew an audible ripple through the gathered men. He did not raise a weapon. He did not shout. He simply stood, hands open, a calmness in his posture that made every accusation feel suddenly shallow. "We seek no land," he said. "No fight. Only shelter for a night." Snow dusted his braids, softened the sharp lines of his features, made him look like a figure carved from winter itself. The men bristled nonetheless. Sheriff Hawthorne dismounted slowly, approaching with the measured steps of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You were told to leave," he said, directing his words at Dakota. Dakota bowed his head slightly. "The storm held us." "Storm's gone now," the sheriff replied. Rosemary felt something ignite inside her. A spark sparked by humiliation, by judgment, by watching kindness be twisted into danger. She stepped down a single stair, placing herself directly between Dakota and the sheriff. The motion was instinctive, terrifying, irreversible. Murmurs cut through the crowd. Tessa's eyes widened in sharp disbelief. The sheriff's brows lifted. "Miss Holloway," he said calmly, "you're making yourself part of a problem you don't understand." A tremor ran through her, but she did not step aside. "No," she said quietly. "I'm standing in the only truth I know. He has treated me with more respect than this town ever has." The words startled even her, but once spoken, they rang through the cold air with a clarity that could not be undone. Dakota inhaled, a slow, stunned breath. The sheriff's gaze hardened. "Be careful," he warned. "A woman defending an outsider. People will talk." "They already do," she replied, voice steady. "And they will continue no matter what I choose." Silence rippled outward, heavy as falling snow. The sheriff studied her with an unreadable expression before stepping back. "This isn't finished," he said. "But tonight, we ride home." He signaled his men, who hesitated, thrown off balance by Rosemary's unexpected defiance. Tessa shot Rosemary a venomous glare before turning her horse sharply. The lanterns retreated, bobbing away in the darkness until they dissolved into the snowfall. When the last hoofbeat faded, Rosemary exhaled shakily and gripped the porch rail to steady herself. Her entire body trembled, not with regret, but with the aftershock of realizing she had crossed a threshold she could never return from. Behind her, Dakota descended the steps slowly, as though approaching something sacred. "You stood for us," he murmured, voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Why?" Rosemary met his gaze, breath still uneven. "Because no one ever stood for me," she whispered. "And I won't let this place make me cruel." Dakota's eyes shone with something raw, gratitude, disbelief, a quiet ache that reached further into her than any words could. For a long moment, neither moved. The snow drifted around them, gentle now, as if the storm had softened in reverence for her choice. Inside, Nita peeked through the doorway, relief warming her small face. Rosemary's heart tightened at the sight. This was what she had protected. Not just a man, not just a child, but the fragile chance at peace they carried like a lantern in dark hands. She looked back at Dakota, sensing a shift larger than either of them could name. "What now?" she whispered. Dakota glanced toward the distant shadows where the riders had disappeared, then back to her with quiet resolve. "Now," he said, "the town will choose its path." He paused, and his voice dropped lower, weighted with something approaching vow. "And so must we." A cold wind swept across the porch, carrying with it a warning that curled beneath her skin. But beneath that warning lived something else, an undeniable warmth that made her pulse quicken. Somewhere in the distance, a second group of horses stirred. And this time, they weren't slowing. The second wave of riders cut through the darkness with a determination the first group had lacked, their silhouettes sharp against the paling horizon. Dawn approached slowly, washing the world in a muted silver that made every breath feel suspended between fear and decision. Rosemary Holloway stood on the porch, her shawl wrapped tight around her, watching the approaching figures with a steadiness she didn't fully understand. Behind her, the warm glow of the cabin spilled outward, softening the snow at her feet. Inside, Nita clung to the edge of the doorway, while Dakota positioned himself between child and threat, a silent wall of resolve. He stepped beside Rosemary, the nearness of him grounding her like a hand pressed over a racing heartbeat. "They come for me," Dakota murmured, voice low as winter wind. "I will go so they leave you unharmed." Rosemary turned, startled by the quiet surrender in his tone. His shoulders looked impossibly heavy beneath the soft dawn light, as though every exile he had endured pressed upon him at once. "No," she whispered. "You go, and they will still punish me for offering a kindness." He looked at her with deep, searching eyes. "Better me alone than both of us caught in their anger." She shook her head, breath fogging in the cold air. "I don't want you walking into their hands without someone who sees your worth." Her voice trembled but did not break. The riders reached the fence line and halted. Sheriff Hawthorne led this group as well, but his expression had shifted. Less fury, more grim resolve. He raised a hand. "Dakota Red Elk, you're ordered to come with us for questioning." The men beside him shifted restlessly, their impatience scraping against the silence. Rosemary stepped forward before Dakota could speak. "He has done nothing wrong," she called out. "You fear him because it is easier than seeing him clearly." Murmurs rippled through the group. Tessa Loudermilk, perched on horseback beside the sheriff, scoffed loudly. "You defend him again? You think a night under your roof makes him harmless?" Rosemary met Tessa's gaze with a calm born of exhaustion and conviction. "A night under my roof showed me more humanity in him than I've seen in any rumor you've breathed into the air." Dakota touched her arm lightly. "Let me face them." But she stepped in front of him, heart pounding. "If you take him," she said, voice cracking with the weight of truth, "you take me as well." The declaration stunned the crowd into silence. Even the sheriff blinked as though struck. Snowflakes drifted lazily between them, the world holding still as if waiting for the next breath to decide everything. Dakota stared at her, something raw and unspoken blooming in his eyes, gratitude, disbelief, and something deeper she dared not name. The sheriff exhaled through his nose, gaze sweeping over the uncertain faces behind him. He was a man shaped by order, reputation, and the pressure of those who demanded swift judgments. But he was also a man who understood the cost of breaking a spirit already bent by loss. At last, he lowered his hand. "You're home," he said quietly. "Your responsibility." The riders exchanged glances, some surprised, others dissatisfied, but none willing to challenge the sheriff's retreat. One by one, they turned their horses, lantern light diminishing until only the soft blue dawn remained. When the last hoofbeat vanished into the distance, Rosemary's knees weakened with relief. She nearly collapsed, but Dakota caught her, his hands warm against the cold settling in her bones. Nita rushed from the doorway, flinging her arms around both of them, her small form trembling with fear undone. Dakota knelt, embracing his daughter, his breath unsteady. Rosemary watched them, feeling something shift inside her, an ache uncoiling into something tender and terrifying. Dakota rose slowly, stepping close enough that she felt his warmth anchor her back to herself. "You gave us safety," he said softly. "Then you offered your voice. Now, you have given us a place to stand." She swallowed hard, her breath catching at the sincerity in his tone. "Stay," she whispered. "For her. For you. For however long feels true." His gaze held hers, steady as the rising sun edging over the hills. "Then dawn finds us with a home," he murmured. The sky warmed into shades of pale gold as Nita ran into the snow laughing for the first time since she'd arrived. Rosemary and Dakota stood in the doorway, two displaced souls held by the fragile hope of morning. And beneath the hush of the new day, a truth settled over her gently. Sometimes home isn't claimed by force, but by courage offered in the cold.